Hello and welcome to our software tutorial series. In this tutorial, we will continue to walk you through how to fill out the main information sheet in the software by completing PIN information. In this tutorial, you will learn how to describe the self-select and practitioner PIN programs, enter information into the software for either the self-select or practitioner PIN program, determine when to mail Form 8453 to the IRS, enter the taxpayer and spouse PINs on the main information sheet, enter an identity protection PIN, enter the third-party designee information, and enter third-party designee information with the paper return where the preparer is the third-party designee. Tax practitioners can e-file individual tax returns only if the returns are signed electronically. Taxpayers must sign their individual income tax returns using a personal identification number, also called the PIN. There are two types of PINs, self-select PIN and practitioner PIN. All electronically filed tax returns should have PINs. If you use a practitioner PIN, you enter the PIN that the taxpayer chooses, which is a 5-digit number that can contain any numbers other than all zeros. You then have the taxpayer sign Form 8879, IRS e-file signature authorization. The taxpayer signs this form to give you permission to enter their PIN in the return. If you use the self-select PIN, the taxpayer enters the PIN on the return. In this case, you allow the taxpayer to actually type the PIN using your computer's keyboard. Another difference in the two methods is that if you use the self-select PIN, you should enter either the taxpayer's previous year adjusted gross income and date of birth, or the PIN the taxpayer used on their previous year tax return. This information allows the IRS to verify the taxpayer's identity. There are several forms that may still need to be mailed to the IRS if used in the return. If the tax return contains one of these forms, you should mail them as an attachment to Form 8453, transmittal for an IRS e-file return. However, keep in mind that you must still use the PIN. Mailing Form 8453 no longer takes the place of a PIN as it did in the past. If the taxpayer's return contains one of the following forms, mail Form 8453. For more complete instructions on when to mail Form 8453, see the IRS instructions for Form 8879 and 8453. In this example, we will be using the self-select PIN method. First, we will enter the ERO PIN in the ERO PIN entry box. We will not be selecting the practitioner's PIN checkbox since we are using the self-select PIN method in this tutorial. Next, we will select the income tax return checkbox. Please remember that if you use the self-select PIN, you must fill in the taxpayer's or spouse's prior year original adjusted gross income or the PIN they used on their prior year tax return. Also, make sure you enter their date of birth in the date of birth section at the top of the main information sheet. Taxpayers that do not have a copy of the original prior year tax return may call the IRS at 1-800-829-1040 to get the original adjusted gross income amount over the phone or a transcript of the tax return. The taxpayer will need to provide certain information to the IRS customer service representative, such as his or her name, Social Security number, and filing status. Allow 7 to 10 days to receive the transcript. Taxpayers should be sure to ask for the original gross income so you can file electronically using the self-select PIN method. If the taxpayer has never filed the tax return or did not need to file a prior year tax return, enter 0 for the original prior year adjusted gross income. Taxpayers that e-filed a prior year tax return and tax documents, Form 56, Form 2350, Form 4868, or Form 9465, and signed electronically can have multiple PINs in the IRS master file. These taxpayers can use any of their prior year PINs to authenticate their identity and sign their current year tax return or document using the self-select PIN method. For more information on how to use the prior year PIN, please visit www.irs.gov, keyword PIN. We will now go back into a return to fill out the PIN information for the taxpayer and spouse. The software carries the current date to the This is today's date field. Allow the taxpayer to enter his or her PIN or enter the PIN yourself if you are authorized by the taxpayer to do so. You must advise taxpayers that they have the option to personally enter the PIN, or the taxpayer can authorize the ERO to enter the PIN for them. In this example, the taxpayer will first type in their PIN. Then we will type in the date the return is being e-filed. Do not enter at today. You must enter the numerical date. The software enters the slashes in the date automatically. And then select the I do not authorize checkbox. The selection of this box designates that the tax preparer cannot enter the PIN for the taxpayer. If the taxpayer is filing a married filing joint return, the spouse must be present to personally enter his or her PIN, or authorize the ERO to input the PIN by completing the IRS e-file signature authorization. In this example, you would now select the spouse's PIN field. The spouse would then type in their PIN and then select the Do Not Authorize checkbox. The spouse's signature date is automatically completed based on the date the taxpayer entered when they entered the information. After completing the PIN information on the main information sheet, you should open Form 8879 and enter the ERO information at the bottom of the form. Once you have completed Form 8879, the ERO firm name carries to the ERO firm name field on the main information sheet. If the taxpayer is an identity theft victim who has been validated by the IRS and has received a CPO 1A letter that contains an identity protection PIN, enter that PIN here. Do not enter leading zeros. The taxpayer would receive this notice if at some point in the past 3 years they informed and provided documentation to the IRS that they were the victim of identity theft that has impacted the filing or processing of their federal income tax return. Taxpayers may allow the paid preparer, a friend, family member, or any other person they choose to discuss the tax return with the IRS. Select No if the taxpayer does not want the IRS to discuss the return with another person. Select Yes to allow the IRS to contact the person authorized and designated by the taxpayer to discuss the taxpayer's return. In this tutorial, we will select the Yes checkbox. The designee's name, phone number, and PIN are required for electronically filed returns. Please remember that the software completes this information if it was entered in tax form defaults. The designee should select a PIN. This number can be any 5 digits other than all zeros. First, type the designee's name in the designee's name field. Type their phone number in the designee's phone number field. And then, type in their PIN in the designee's PIN field. In the event you are filing a paper return and do not want to enter this information, you can type Preparer in the designee's name box and leave the other 2 boxes in this section blank. You would then press F3 on your keyboard in the required entries to take the red out. You should now be able to describe the self-select and practitioner PIN programs, enter information into the software for either the self-select or practitioner PIN program, determine when to mail Form 8453 to the IRS, enter the taxpayer and spouse PINs on the main information sheet, enter an identity protection PIN, enter the third-party designee information, and enter third-party designee information with the paper return where the preparer is the third-party designee. Thank you for viewing this tutorial.